Have you ever noticed how most people hide their true colors? They laugh when they want to cry, praise when they're jealous, say everything's fine when inside they're broken. Carl Jung said that this social mask, the persona, is necessary to survive in society, but it never reveals the whole truth. Someone's true character doesn't emerge in rehearsed moments, but rather in spontaneous reactions, when the ego is challenged and the shadow tries to escape. And here's the part that almost no one knows. You don't need to spend years with someone to discover who they really are. You don't need to spy on messages, investigate their past, or collect evidence. You just need to notice two things, just two. Two simple yet brutal signs that reveal more about someone's soul than any resume, speech, or promise. Once you learn to see this, you'll never be fooled by masks again. In this video, you'll learn how to spot these signs anywhere. In the workplace, when a colleague tries to appear perfect, in relationships, when someone insists on always being right, and even in casual encounters, when first impressions seem too impeccable. But the most uncomfortable thing is that these signs don't just reveal others. They also reveal you. Yes, because how you react when challenged exposes parts of your own shadow. This is more than psychology. It's a map for your relationships, your business, your family, and even how you see yourself. When you notice these details, you understand why some people irritate you so much, discover why certain conflicts seem to recur, and finally see how hidden archetypes shape your life without you even realizing it. It's like lifting a veil that's always been there. After that, nothing feels the same. What I'm about to share here isn't distant theory or academic lecturing. These are practical, powerful keys you can apply immediately. And if you have the courage to listen until the end, you'll not only learn to see the true character of others, but you'll also be forced to face your own reflection. So get ready, because from now on, the masks will begin to fall. A persona ea sombra. Imagine someone walking into a room full of strangers. Almost instinctively, they don their business attire. That ready smile, the controlled tone of voice, the carefully chosen words. Carl Jung called this mask the persona. It's the facade we present to the world to be accepted, admired, or even respected. But while this facade shines, there's a dark room within the psyche where we lock away everything we deem inadequate. The shadow. The curious thing is that in this psychological basement, we harbor not only flaws, but also untapped talents. Those who appear shy in public may hide an intense creative force. Those who act as if they have everything under control may carry within them a paralyzing fear of failure. Think of Sarah, that colleague who always appears confident, impeccable in meetings, resolute in every word. Behind her firm persona, she's consumed with the fear of being considered incompetent. Her ego has built such a convincing character that even close friends believe the act. But every time Sarah suppresses her fears, she feeds her shadow even more. This process, known as shadow work, is like trying to hold a ball underwater. The more force you apply, the more pressure builds to bring it back to the surface. And inevitably, that ball slips away one day, often at the worst possible moment. If you look closely at your own life, you'll realize how many times you've played roles that didn't represent who you truly are. How many times have you said, "I'm fine," when in reality, you were shattered inside? The persona serves as a shield, yes, but also as a silent prison. True spirituality doesn't ask you to throw off this mask all at once, but to learn to recognize it. The first step can be simple. Write down in a notebook all the phrases you say just to appear appropriate. "It was great to see you. I'm calm. I don't need help." And when you reread it, you'll realize the chasm between who you appear to be and who you truly feel. What's fascinating is that Jung didn't see the shadow as an enemy, but as a fertile field. Rejected archetypes reside within it. The warrior you stifle because you fear appearing aggressive, The artist you silence because they said, art doesn't make money. The passionate lover you buried to avoid being hurt again. By acknowledging these pieces of yourself, life begins to take on colors that were previously hidden. What seemed like weakness can transform into strength. Sarah, who hid her fear of failure, might discover that her vulnerability makes her more human and connected to others. But here comes the great provocation. What if the very thing you fear most to reveal is the very thing that can set you free? It's like a rusty key tucked away in the back of a drawer. Ugly, heavy, but tailor-made to open the door you've always wanted to walk through. The persona may even give you applause, but it's the shadow that offers depth. And perhaps that's why, when someone touches sensitive areas in your life, the reaction is so intense. This is the clue that there's something hidden, about to be revealed. And this is where we enter the next mystery, the projections and triggers that reveal what you try to hide. Projection and triggers. There's a curious phenomenon. What bothers us most in others is often a mirror of what we reject in ourselves. Carl Jung said the shadow has a special trick. It hides by projecting itself onto other people's behavior. It's as if the mind were saying, "This isn't mine, it's his," but in reality it's a reflection. Sarah, for example, couldn't stand her colleague Mike's carefree attitude. He seemed to float through life, unconcerned with deadlines, unblaming himself for mistakes. The uncomfortable detail is that deep down, Sarah envied precisely this freedom she never allowed herself. Her discomfort with others was merely an echo of her inner prison. Projections act like a distorting lens. Have you ever noticed how some people get irritated by someone's laugh, a stranger's bold outfit, or even someone else's laziness? Often, it's not about the other person. It's about what we can't accept in ourselves. Spirituality teaches that we don't react to the world, but to the unresolved parts within ourselves. The ego, to remain intact, pushes these parts into the shadows and then points the finger outward. So instead of dealing with their own anxiety, the person accuses others of being disorganized. Instead of facing their own vanity, they criticize their colleague for wanting to show off too much. A practical exercise to identify these projections is to pay attention to your emotional triggers. Make a simple list. Who irritates you? Who makes you envious? Who immediately triggers anger? Then silently ask yourself, what does this characteristic represent in me that I can't admit? If you're bothered by someone's laziness, perhaps there's a stifled desire for rest within you. If you despise loud talkers, perhaps your own voice has been imprisoned for years. This type of shadow work isn't comfortable, but it works like an X-ray of the soul, revealing not only the wounds, but also the potential you try to hide. Mike, deep down, was just a mirror for Sarah. What she called his irresponsibility was actually her psyche's silent plea for lightness. How often do we do this? How often do we hate someone just because they remind us of what we'd like to be, but don't allow ourselves to be? The truth is that projection is the stage where the ego plays out its greatest fears and repressed desires. The most provocative thing is that the more we deny it, the stronger the projection becomes. It's no wonder there are people who seem to touch our nerves from the first encounter, as if awakening something ancient and deep that we carry without realizing it. And here the inevitable question arises. If our irritations reveal so much about us, couldn't the key to understanding our shadow lie precisely in these intense reactions? Think of it like a map. Each emotional trigger points to a place within you that demands recognition. And when this recognition happens, the projection dissolves and gives way to clarity. That's why, before we talk about advanced techniques and exercises, we need to face a simple, almost disconcerting question. What kind of person can you absolutely not stand? What kind of person can you absolutely not stand? When someone asks, what kind of people can't you stand? Most people respond without thinking. Fake people, lazy, arrogant. But Carl Jung encourages us to look beyond the surface. This spontaneous answer almost always points to the parts of our own shadow that we try to deny. It's as if the soul uses the question to surreptitiously reveal its most intimate wounds. The curious thing is that the more intense your reaction, the greater the chance you're confronting something you've been hiding from yourself. It's not about the other person, it's about you, and that changes everything. Consider the case of John, a perfectionist engineer, extremely disciplined, who prided himself on his almost military-grade productivity. For him, anyone's greatest flaw was laziness. He hated seeing his colleague Lisa dawdling, taking breaks, putting things off. But if he observed closely, he would realize that John's hatred had nothing to do with Lisa. It was a reflection of his repressed desire for rest. The shadow screamed, "I want to stop too, I want to breathe too." But to maintain the persona of an exemplary professional, John stifled this need. What we see in others is often the internal war we silently wage. Now think about yourself. Who are the people who almost automatically annoy you? Take this test. Write down 3 types of behavior you absolutely can't stand. Then ask yourself, what does this say about me? What do I want to express but don't allow myself to? If you can't tolerate loud talk, it could be that your own voice has been stifled for years. If you feel anger toward those who are free, perhaps there's a hidden yearning to break the chains of perfectionism. This simple practice is true shadow work in the form of a question. It seems uncomfortable, but it acts as a psychological magnifying glass on the blind spots in your psyche. Spirituality shows that relationships are not chance encounters, but carefully positioned mirrors. It's as if life places before you precisely those people who will poke at your hidden wounds. The ego calls this bad luck, but Jung called it an opportunity for individuation. If you look honestly at your triggers, each person you can't stand becomes an involuntary teacher. They reveal what you pretend not to see in yourself, and that's precisely where the potential for growth lies. After all, no one evolves with praise alone. It's the discomfort that forces the soul to awaken. And here's the detail few realize. What you reject can also be your source of power. John, by recognizing his anger and laziness, could learn to honor rest and balance his life. Lisa, for him, wasn't an enemy, but a mirror. The same goes for you. Every aversion is a clue, every irritation is an invitation. And perhaps that's why the second question we'll explore shortly is even more challenging. Remember a time when you were sure you were right and discovered you weren't. Shadow as potential. It's tempting to think of the shadow as merely a repository of flaws. Anger, envy, laziness, jealousy. But Carl Jung said the shadow also holds treasures, gifts we repress out of fear or shame. Think of it like a locked chest in the basement. Along with the dust of insecurities, there are also forgotten gems. Often, you don't play an instrument because someone said music has no future, or you never tried to write because in school they made fun of your essay. These parts were locked away in the shadow. The ego constructed a functional persona to survive, but left entire talents out. Spirituality teaches that by facing the shadow, you don't just find monsters, you also find pieces of gold. Sarah, whom we already know, lived imprisoned by her confident persona. What she hid was not only her fear of failure, but also her sensitivity and empathy. Every time she pretended to be unshakable, she buried her ability to truly connect with people. This is a classic example. When we deny our vulnerability, we lose access to the power of authenticity. Jung reminded us that the shadow contains both what we reject for appearing bad and what we repress for appearing too good to be accepted. Who hasn't held back from shining so as not to upset someone? Who hasn't diminished their achievements to fit in with a group? A practical exercise to reclaim this potential is to write a list of the qualities you admired in yourself as a child. Perhaps you were curious, creative, bold, and fearless in your speaking. Ask yourself, where are these characteristics today? Often, they were hidden so you could fit in with society. Reclaiming them isn't nostalgia, it's a growth strategy. The child who invented stories can become the adult capable of writing books. The teenager who drew in the margins of his notebook can become the architect of innovative ideas. Shadow work serves not only to heal wounds, but also to reopen doors that the ego closed too soon. Spirituality invites you to see the shadow as fertile ground, not as cursed terrain. The stifled warrior can become the force that defends your limits. The rejected lover can be the passion that breathes life into your marriage. The buried dreamer can be the source of your entrepreneurial vision. Entire archetypes await reactivation within you. But this requires courage, because facing the shadow is like looking in the mirror after years of not recognizing yourself. It's accepting that what you called weakness may be exactly what's missing for your wholeness. And here's the provocation. What if what you fear most to show is precisely what will make you unforgettable? Think of how many artists, entrepreneurs, and leaders only found their path when they embraced the side that society deemed inappropriate. What seemed like a flaw became a signature. The shadow isn't the enemy. It's raw potential waiting to be honed. But of course, this leads us to an uncomfortable question, almost like a spiritual test. Have you ever been absolutely certain you were right, only to discover you weren't? A time when you were sure you were right. Few things shake the ego as much as discovering we were wrong. Think about it. How many times have you defended an idea tooth and nail, only to realize later that the reality was different? Carl Jung reminded us that this discomfort is golden for those seeking the truth about themselves. Because at that very moment when certainty crumbles, the persona falls away and the shadow reveals itself. It's as if life pulls the rug out from under us to show us how much we still need to grow. The curious thing is that this moment, painful for many, can be one of the most liberating in the spiritual journey. Imagine an executive convinced that his team was failing due to a lack of discipline. He rigidly imposed deadlines, punished delays, and believed he was right, until he discovered that the problem wasn't discipline, but the lack of clarity in the planning he himself had developed. The shock was immediate. It wasn't the other who was to blame, it was he. This experience could be seen as a failure, but if faced with humility, it becomes an exercise in shadow work. Error isn't the enemy, it's a mirror. It shows how internal archetypes, the controlling leader, the harsh judge, can distort perception until they blind us to the truth. You've been there too, even if in smaller situations. The domestic dispute where you swore you were right about who left the light on. The argument at work where you defended the wrong number without realizing it. These examples seem trivial, but they carry a greater symbol, the difficulty of admitting fallibility. The ego loves to build castles of reason, but a breath of reality is enough to bring them down. The real question is, what do you do in this moment? Do you pretend nothing happened, or do you take a deep breath and acknowledge your humanity? It's in this moment that the potential for growth opens up. Spirituality invites us to transform these shocks into learning experiences. A good exercise is to write down 3 recent occasions when you realized you were wrong. Then, write down your immediate reaction: irritation, denial, humor, silence. This simple act reveals how you deal with the persona's downfall. If you react with anger, perhaps the warrior archetype is wounded. If you react with indifference, it could be your inner sage trying to soften the blow. The point is that admitting failure doesn't make you smaller, but more real. The more genuine this recognition, the closer you'll be to the individuation Jung so championed. And herein lies the provocation. Aren't you trapped by certainties that will one day prove to be illusions? Perhaps about relationships, career, spirituality, even about who you believe you are. Asking someone about a time they realized they were wrong is more than just curiosity. It's a way of revealing how willing they are to grow. Because only those who face their own mistakes without losing their dignity can truly move forward. And it is precisely in this difference between maturity and blind defense that we find our next step. Examples of maturity versus defensiveness. Few things reveal as much about someone's character as how they deal with their own mistakes. Carl Jung said that the path to individuation involves the courage to face one's shadow without disguise. And it is in this confrontation that we can distinguish maturity from defensiveness. When someone reacts with maturity, they acknowledge their flaws without losing their dignity, as if to say, yes, I made a mistake, and now I learn from it. Defensiveness, on the other hand, is the ego on high alert, trying to protect the persona at any cost, whether by deflecting the issue or attacking the other person. It is in this contrast that we see who is truly ready to grow and who is still held hostage by their own shadow. An example of maturity. Imagine a team leader who, upon realizing a planning error, gathers everyone together and admits, "It was my mistake, and I want to fix it together with you." This gesture doesn't diminish her authority. On the contrary, it enhances it. It shows that her leadership persona isn't just a facade, but a reflection of genuine character. Now compare this with another case. A manager who, when confronted with a failure, blames subordinates, changes the subject, or becomes overly excited. This is the inflated ego in action, trying to save face at any cost. The shadow, ignored, explodes in the form of arrogance. In personal life, the dynamic is the same. A partner who admits, "I was wrong to speak to you that way," builds bridges of trust. Meanwhile, another who reacts with irony or fury when questioned digs a chasm in the relationship. Herein lies the great irony. Admitting flaws strengthens bonds, while denying them destroys them. It's as if spirituality tests our courage, to be honest with ourselves, or to hide behind a mask. And let's face it, no one can maintain a perfect persona for long without the cracks appearing. To apply this in your daily life, do a simple exercise. The next time someone points something out in you, instead of reacting immediately, take a deep breath and ask, what if this criticism has some truth to it? This doesn't mean accepting everything unfiltered, but using each situation as a shadow work laboratory. This way, instead of running away from the shadow, you illuminate it. And if you want to delve even deeper, look for books like Edward Edinger's The Ego and the Archetypes, which expand on Jung's view of how the psyche reacts to criticism and mistakes. These readings serve as maps to avoid getting lost in emotional labyrinths. But here's the challenge. Can you recognize the signs of defensiveness in yourself? That blush, the rising voice, the urge to justify yourself at any cost. These are warning signs that the shadow is being nudged. Maturity, on the other hand, is almost silent. It admits, learns, and moves on. The difference is stark, and we all oscillate between these poles. The question is, which one dominates your life? Because if you don't learn to recognize these signs, the next stages, the deeper warning signs of the shadow, will go unnoticed. Warning signs to watch out for. It's not always easy to tell when the ego is in control and the shadow has taken the wheel. But there are clear warning signs, like flashing headlights on the road, warning that something needs attention. Carl Jung observed that these signs don't appear by chance. They are direct manifestations of the psyche trying to find its balance. One of the first signs is the habit of blaming entire groups. When someone says things like, "Everyone is like that," "This generation is no good," or "Nobody knows how to do anything right," they are projecting an unresolved internal conflict. Generalizations are shortcuts that hide the difficulty of facing one's own responsibility. Another sign is an inability to admit mistakes. The person who never backs down, who defends a point to the bitter end, even when the evidence screams otherwise, is dominated by an inflated ego. This individual's persona feeds on the image of infallibility, but behind it, the shadow whispers deep insecurity. It's like a house of cards. It seems solid, but a breath of reality is all it takes for it to crumble. What separates the wise from the foolish is not the absence of mistakes, but the willingness to acknowledge them. There's also sudden anger, that seemingly unprovoked outburst when someone asks a simple question or gives constructive feedback. This disproportionate fury is what Jung would call a shadow complex being activated. Imagine a co-worker who, upon hearing, "Maybe you should review that report," reacts as if insulted. It's not about the report, it's about the underlying fear of being considered incompetent. This reaction shows that the internal wound is much greater than the external stimulus. A fourth sign is aggressive deflection, abruptly changing the subject, attacking the other person, or using sarcasm to avoid criticism. This is the classic ego defense when the shadow begins to emerge. It's as if to say, if I ridicule or intimidate the other person, I don't have to face my feelings. You've probably seen this in public debates when, instead of responding to the question, the person counterattacks with insults. This tactic, besides impoverishing the dialogue, betrays a deep fear of shedding one's persona. These warning signs don't just arise in major arguments. They appear in everyday life, at home, at work, even in trivial moments. Observing yourself in these situations is a powerful shadow work exercise. Ask yourself, do I blame others too much? Do I refuse to admit mistakes? Do I explode for no apparent reason? Do I avoid focusing? Each honest answer is a key to understanding how the ego operates behind the scenes. And if you begin to recognize these patterns, you'll realize they can be transformed into tools for connection and learning. But this only happens when we discover how to apply these insights practically in relationships, business, and even parenting. Practical use. There's no point in delving into Carl Jung's concepts, shadow, ego, persona, and archetypes, if everything remains just an idea. The true value lies in applying this knowledge to everyday life. And this is where the questions we explored, what kind of person can't you stand? And when were you certain you were right and then discovered you weren't? Become practical tools. They're not just intellectual exercises, but keys to deepening friendships, strengthening relationships, and even improving business results. Imagine using them in a conversation with a close friend. Instead of talking about the weather, you open up space to reveal vulnerabilities and connect on a much more authentic level. In the professional world, these questions have transformative power. Consider a team that meets weekly. Instead of limiting itself to reports and metrics, the leader could ask, what recent mistake do you recognize you made and learned from? This simple question dismantles the masks of perfection and creates a culture of growth. Companies that apply this type of practice see greater trust among colleagues, more innovation, and less fear of taking risks. Spirituality applied to the corporate world is not an escape from reality, but the courage to deal with it in a more human and profound way. In parenting, the impact is even more evident. Asking a child or adolescent about a situation where they thought they were right and later discovered they were wrong teaches humility from an early age. It's different from punishing them for making a mistake. It's guiding them to realize that mistakes are a natural part of life. This type of dialogue builds more resilient young people who are less dependent on external approval. By applying shadow work at home, you not only educate, but also create an atmosphere where vulnerability is seen as strength. And of course, in our love lives, These questions act as bridges. Imagine a couple who, instead of arguing for hours about who's right or wrong, decides to answer together. When did we realize we were deluded by our persona and blind to our shadow? This simple practice can dissolve accumulated hurt and open space for empathy. Spirituality isn't far from everyday life. It breathes in every dialogue we dare to have without masks. That's why relationships that employ this level of honesty become nearly indestructible. But here's the thing. These questions only work when asked with empathy, not manipulation. There's no point using them to shame or expose someone. They're invitations, not traps. When applied respectfully, they can transform an ordinary dinner into an unforgettable conversation, a cold meeting into a meeting of souls, a worn-out relationship into a rebirth. And it's precisely this practical application that prepares us for the next step, understanding how confronting the shadow guides us to the most profound process of all: individuation and inner growth. Individuation and growth. Carl Jung said that the ultimate goal of human beings is not to be perfect, but to be whole. And this wholeness only happens when we are willing to face the shadow, revise the ego's stories, and shed the persona. This process is called individuation, the journey of becoming who we truly are, integrating light and darkness, gifts and wounds, virtues and limitations. Every time you acknowledge a mistake, admit a projection, or recognize a trigger, you are taking a step in this direction. It's not about building a flawless version of yourself, but about accepting your full, unfiltered humanity. In practice, individuation means living more authentically. It's like leaving a theater where you've always been an actor to finally become the author. Spirituality shows that there is no greater freedom than allowing yourself to be true, even when it doesn't please everyone. Instead of living trapped by the applause your persona guarantees, you begin to seek the inner silence that integrating your shadow offers. The result is a life less concerned with appearances and more focused on essence. Peace comes not from being accepted, but from accepting yourself. Practical examples abound. Think of an entrepreneur who, by recognizing their arrogance as part of their shadow, learns to listen to their team and transforms their company. Or a mother who, by admitting her hidden fears, connects more deeply with her children. Or someone who, after years of pretending to be strong, finally allows themselves to cry and discovers that vulnerability is strength, not weakness. Each of these experiences shows that individuation is not a distant idea. It is a daily practice made up of small, courageous choices. This is where the questions we explore come in. What kind of person can't you stand? And when did you think you were right but were wrong? They function as mirrors, revealing what the unconscious tries to hide. They are portals to self-knowledge, and used with discipline, accelerate the process of individuation. Shadow work then becomes not an isolated exercise, but a way of life, observing every reaction, every irritation, every certainty, and asking yourself what it has to reveal about your soul. And here's the final provocation. What do you do with all this? Because intellectual understanding isn't enough. You have to act. Individuation requires courage to change how you approach work, relationships, and silence. It requires a willingness to accept criticism, embrace mistakes, and laugh at yourself. And perhaps that's why Jung insisted that this path wasn't for the weak, but for those who desire truth above comfort. Now the question remains, how can we introduce this immersion in an engaging way so that each person recognizes themselves from the very first moment? You've realized that you don't need to spend years with someone to know their true character. 2 clues are enough, 2 signs that reveal more than words or promises. Now the question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you continue to ignore the signs that have always been there for you? Or will you begin to see beyond the persona and ego that people display? Think about it. How many times have you deceived yourself by relying solely on appearance? How many opportunities have you missed by failing to recognize the projections, triggers, and complexes lurking in the shadows? And even more so, how many times have you worn your own mask to avoid being discovered? This is the challenge Jung left us, to look not only outward, but also inward. From now on, every reaction, whether yours or that of others, can become a window into the unconscious. Every irritation, every certainty, every defensiveness is an opportunity for individuation, for becoming more authentic. True spiritual growth doesn't happen when you collect pretty phrases, but when you apply this knowledge to every conversation, every relationship, every choice you make. So I ask you, are you willing to face the truth, even if it hurts? Are you ready to see not only others, but yourself without masks? Because only those who have the courage to cross the shadows find the light of the self. If this message resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here every week, we'll open new doors for the mind, heart, and soul together. And maybe, just maybe, it's on this path that you'll discover your own truth.